morning, welcome back to the shop. The other day I posted on Instagram, it was Thursday, so that Instagram has this thing of hashtag Hand Tool Thursday. And so for Blacksmith, what I chose to post were my larger hammers, my sledgehammer and strikers hammers. And I thought, well, you know, we haven't talked about hammers over here, so maybe we should discuss hammers. And we'll discuss more than just the big hammers. We'll discuss some special purpose hammers and my regular day-to-day forging hammers and what makes a good blacksmithing hammer. Hammers for the blacksmith shop come in a huge variety of sizes, shapes, and styles. Here are a couple of extremes of hammers that are swung by the blacksmith or by an apprentice. This little planishing hammer used for smoothing sheet metal work would be very similar to a hammer used by a goldsmith, silversmith, coppersmith, but also blacksmiths for thin iron work. It's probably the lightest, most delicate hammer that I have in the shop. I'm sure there are other shops with lighter, more delicate hammers. And this 14-pound sledgehammer that would be swung two-handed by a striker assisting the blacksmith in most cases is the largest handheld hammer that I have in the shop. Not every hammer in the blacksmith shop is a handheld hammer swung by the human being. There are human being powered hammers that you use your foot. This is a treadle hammer. There are powered hammers. In this case, a 25-pound low-giant mechanical hammer that dates from about 1928. The largest hammer in my shop is this bull hammer. It's about 120-pound head weight, and it's pneumatic powered. So that runs off a separate air compressor. When you talk about power hammers, 2,000 pounds was not an uncommon hammer 50 or 60 years ago. Those are pretty rare now, but 500-pound hammers are still pretty common. I don't have one. When we discuss hammers in the blacksmith shop, we usually refer to them two different ways. The main thing we refer to is the peen. Is it a cross peen hammer, or is it a ball peen hammer, or is it something else? And we'll discuss that as well. This is probably the best example of a something else. This is a claw hammer. The descriptive phrase for describing this hammer is the claw, the part that pulls the nails. Obviously that's not a blacksmith's hammer, that is a carpenter's hammer. Now, if this is the only hammer you have, yes, this face will pound iron, and it's better than not doing any work at all, but you'll soon tire of using a claw hammer because they just really aren't blacksmithing hammers. When you talk about a ball peen hammer, this is the ball. This is the peen end. The peen is just the opposite face. We have a face in the hammer, and we have a peen on the hammer. So this is a cross peen hammer. By cross peen hammer, that means the peen is perpendicular or 90 degrees to the hammer, the handle and the swing. So when you're swinging this way, the peen is 90 degrees to that swing. A straight peen hammer would have a peen in line with the hammer head. So why a peen? Why do we have hammers? Engineers' hammers, blacksmiths' hammers, just everybody that's got hammers in the shop, everybody knows what a ball peen hammer is. But do people understand why there is a peen on a hammer and what that peen means? If you've ever baked bread or made pie crust and used a rolling pin to roll out the dough, then you might understand how a peen works. That's all this is your rolling pin. If you are striking this way, the material is going to spread this direction. It's not going to spread so much this way because the peen is forcing it, just like a rolling pin would rolling out a pie crust, it's forcing it to spread this direction. If you have a straight peen hammer and you're working opposite, it would be spreading this direction instead of this direction. Whereas a ball peen hammer spreads all the way around. It's good for dishing and things like that, and frequently is used for heading rivets or peening a rivet, which goes right along with it being a peen. So the classic hammer that everybody has in their shop, even if they are not a blacksmith, is because of what blacksmiths want in a hammer. Sometimes what we really want is just a little bit of shaping. And this is a rounding hammer. It has a slightly domed face on one side, so it's sort of a takeoff of the ball peen hammer without being a true ball. So it doesn't really called a peen. It's a two-faced hammer and one's round. So it is a rounding hammer, and then a flat face on the other side. And these are becoming quite popular. A lot of blacksmiths really like rounding hammers these days. You can also split the difference in a cross peen hammer. This one is a diagonal peen, and I like this. This is my most used hammer. This is about a 2 1/4 pound diagonal peen hammer, but it allows the material, you're spreading like you would with a cross peen hammer, but the cross peen hammer, let me zoom out here, you can see that if I were drawing that, if my arm was a piece of iron and I were drawing it out, my knuckles are right over the hot iron. The diagonal peen hammer has the advantage that your knuckles are offset. Unfortunately, it doesn't work too well if you're going this direction because you've got to swing your hand unnaturally this way. So the cross peen is still better. My recommendation for your first hammer is going to be a cross peen hammer. This was my first blacksmithing hammer. It's only on its second handle, which really surprises me. I've had it for over 30 years. It's been redressed numerous times. I just cleaned up the face the other day. Hammers will start to mushroom out, and they will eventually chip if you don't clean them up. So keep an eye on it and grind, file, or whatever it takes to keep the hammer face in good shape. This is a 2 1/2 pound hammer. So it's a 40-ounce hammer. And this one's actually a Craftsman. I don't know if you can still get a decent hammer from Craftsman or not. Like I say, I've had that one for 30 years. When I refer to this as a 2 1/2 pound or 40-ounce hammer, that's the other way we describe hammers, is by weight. So a 2 1/2 pound cross peen, pound and a half ball peen, or a 3 pound rounding hammer. The reason I like the cross peen hammer is because it's versatile. It will draw out sideways, it will draw out lengthwise just by turning your arm 90 degrees while you're swinging. It's got a flat face on it for general work. The corner of the peen can be used for some small specific spreading. It's just a good versatile hammer. As far as weight, that is up to your comfort and your strength. If you haven't been swinging a hammer, if the blacksmithing is your first taste to hammer work, start with a 1 1/2 or 2 pound hammer and just do small stuff to start with. Don't think you've got to start with a 3 pound hammer. I don't swing a 3 pound. I've been doing this for over 30 years, and I rarely swing a 3 pound hammer. I use this when I need it, but I'm not going to use it all day long. These two hammers, the 2 1/2 pound cross peen and the 2 pound diagonal peen, or 2 1/4, you have to weigh it to be sure. These are my most used hammers. I use these for 90% of the work I do at the anvil is one of these two hammers. But it does pay to have a variety of sizes. I have other cross peen hammers. They are different styles. That's referred to as a French locksmith's hammer. They're a very good cross peen hammer. The only thing I don't like about these commercial hammers that you buy from the blacksmithing suppliers is the handles are too big as far as I'm concerned. You can see I've sanded a lot of this handle down. That grip was just too big. I swung this for a day. While it's not particularly heavy, it caused me to have a flare-up of tendonitis in my elbow because I was over gripping. So make sure you rasp, sand down, whatever it takes to make a handle that is comfortable in your hand that you can swing. Too small is going to cause an injury, too large is going to cause an injury. So you need to work with that. There are custom-made hammers. This one came from William Bastis. It's about a 3-pound cross peen. I really like this hammer. It's one of my favorites. I don't know why I don't swing it more other than the fact that it's 3 pounds instead of 2.5 pounds. It's just enough heavier. You see that the handle on this hammer is really relatively thin, but it's got a nice swell so my hand can't slide off the end. In fact, this rounding hammer is also a custom hammer. This one comes from Stuart Shirley here in Colorado. And he makes a really nice hammer, so I bought one of his. I like to support other blacksmiths when I can. And this is the diagonal peen hammer is one I made, and I've got other hammers around here that I've made. And for that matter, I think we'll make a hammer sometime this week, and we'll do a video of making a hammer. But all of your hammers are going to come in various sizes. So what do you need? I guess I already mentioned, I think your first hammer should be a cross peen in the 1.5 to 2.5 pound range. This one's about 1.5 pounds. You're going to go out and buy your first hammer. Here's where I would start. Something like this. Very first blacksmithing hammer, cross peen hammer. Relatively reasonable in weight depending on your strength and your familiarity with swinging hammers. And then I would add perhaps a mid to lightweight ball peen hammer. Oh, something in the pound and a half range. Maybe even a smaller ball peen hammer, because you'll find a lot of use for the lighter ball peen hammers. And I would work with those 2 to 3 hammers. I don't actually do any replica work myself. I've dabbled a little bit and don't really do much of it. But I find these useful for doing other things, like when I'm working on roses and other floral elements. Sometimes these hammers like this will work. Something like this I use sometimes when I'm doing a candle holder or a skillet dish. So they can be quite useful. So there's lots and lots of hammers. Rounding hammers, cross peen hammers, ball peen hammers, sledgehammers. Start with a hand hammer, learn how to use it, get comfortable with it, and then add what you need after that. I commented about dressing hammers, and I'll go a little bit more detail on that. The main thing on the face is to keep it from mushrooming. You can find lots of old hammers out there on the used market that the face is very mushroomed. You can see this one is starting to mushroom some. So this one needs to be dressed. It hasn't cracked or chipped, so it's not really a danger yet. But you want to dress it before it cracks or chips. So this is the time to dress this hammer. The peen on the hammer, let me back up. The face on the hammer should be more or less flat with round edges. You don't want sharp edges. But on your main hammer, you also don't want it domed like you would a rounding hammer. That's not what this is. This is a forging hammer. It's meant to have a flat face. So try to keep it mostly flat with just relieved edges so you don't leave marks. The peen, on the other hand, it has the same thing. Most peens will come rounded. You really want the peen flat across the middle and well rounded on the edges. And it's much more effective that way. Otherwise, you're just leaving creases in your work. This peen is much more effective at moving metal. You also want to relieve it a little bit in this direction. That's important as well. Again, you don't want to leave little corner marks and divots. Hammers aren't just for beating up and texturing, they are for moving metal. And that's what you want them to do. When we talk about a hammer that needs to be dressed, this is one just the way it came from a garage sale. I've never used it because it needs to be dressed. And I don't know if you can see this in there. There are chips missing off of that. When you knock a chip off a hammer, that's a big deep chip here, that chip goes somewhere. If you're not wearing safety glasses, like Mom always said, you could put an eye out with that thing, which is why you should always wear safety glasses. A lot of blacksmiths have little chips off their hammer or the top of a chisel that they should have dressed, and they knew they should have dressed it, but they've got a little chip embedded somewhere in their wrist or their arm. So try to keep these things dressed, keep them cleaned up, and wear your safety glasses. As far as the tales about hitting two hammers, using one hammer to drive another hammer, I would agree that that's bad practice and you shouldn't do it, but you're not going to explode a hammer. What you're going to do is knock a chip off, and that chip is going to go somewhere and it could end up embedded in you. So don't do it, but it's not going to shatter a hammer into 1,000 pieces. Now that tools are all made out of tool steel, industry doesn't do variable tempers like we might in the blacksmith shop. The tool you're striking is almost always going to be hard steel, just like the hammer face. So it's a common thing, and they survive it pretty well. But if you don't have to do it, don't do it. You can take old ball peen hammers, soften this end, reforge this end into punches, chisels, and whatever you want. Just don't harden this end, and that's perfectly acceptable, because this will then be softer than your hammer. So that's just a brief overview of hammers. Like I say, I may have 50 of them in this shop, including brass hammers and lead hammers and rawhide mallets and wooden mallets, specialty hammers, dishing, forming, shaping, ball peens, cross peens, diagonal peens, straight peens. There's a huge variety. So get started, get yourself one good hammer or two good hammers, and get back to work. Well, thank you for letting me ramble aimlessly about hammers and what my opinions on hammers are. Hopefully you found some use out of the video. If so, make sure you give it a thumbs up. If you thought it was pretty awful, well, give it a thumbs down. That way I'll know what people really want to see here. I can look at what's popular and what's not. If you do like the channel in general, please subscribe, watch some of the other videos, comment if you've got suggestions, if there's something you'd like to see, a subject you want covered, just let me know and I'll try to work it in. I've got lots of ideas, both of my own and from other people, so it may take a little while before I get to all of them. And that's part of the idea. Hopefully we'll be doing this for a long time to come.